Okay, so I hope you're excited for what's next. We have Tim Raines from Amazon. Tim, welcome. Hey, Tim, are you on mute?
I should be okay now. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. You can go a little louder, maybe. I don't know if that's possible.
I will try to make that possible.
Okay. And Tim, when you get a second, tell us a little bit about yourself. I think we had a screen earlier with your bio on it, and we might have taken it down so we could put. Oh, here it is. Got Tim Raines. All right.
Yeah, well, thanks for the introduction, Bridget. My name is Tim Raines. I'm the Worldwide Public Sector Security and Compliance Lead at Amazon Web Services, or what we call AWS. Great to be here. I love the trivia questions. I didn't know the answer to any of them.
Right.
Um, I'm based in Seattle. I've worked at AWS for about 4 years. Previous to this role, I actually joined AWS in London, England. I spent 3 years there as the leader for security and compliance for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So in these roles in public sector, I get a chance to speak to a lot of education customers. In fact, earlier this week, I was at the EDUCAUSE conference in Philadelphia, speaking to higher ed customers there about security and compliance. So it's near to my heart. I love the education vertical of the public sector. Previously, I worked for a long, long time at Microsoft. So 17, 18 years there. I was their global chief security advisor and so on. Worked lots of roles there over the years. And recently I published a book you can see on the slide as well, which is a pretty easy read. It's for chief information security officers and security teams and CTOs, CIOs, that type of thing, to help them sort of understand what cybersecurity strategies look like, because I don't meet very many organizations that actually have a strategy per se. So I wrote a book about it if you're interested. I'll talk a little bit about some of the concepts today during this session.
And Tim, I know you probably did say this. Is this book specifically for educators in the education
No,
sector or all IT?
yeah, it'll help all public sector and commercial sector organizations. I think it's a pretty really focused on cybersecurity and not so much on a specific vertical, in the public sector. However, there is a chapter on ingredients for a successful strategy that will probably resonate with a lot of people in education.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and take myself off screen and hand it over to you. Thank you so much, and we'll be paying attention and watching for. I know you're going to be talking about security and data security for students. So I know this will be something we can all need, that we all need.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, I'm super jazzed to be here. So, Bridget, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And so I just wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about sort of the differences, compare and contrast on-premises IT environments with what we do in Amazon Web Services, which is the cloud. And just to kind of compare and contrast this so that you have a better idea when I dive into a few of the details, that hopefully this will make more sense, right? But the IT directors and CIOs and CTOs of different organizations, and particularly in education, I mentioned another conference I was at this week, and I had a chance to co-present with a CIO of a very large university in the US. They've been doing IT for like 3 decades or more, right? And so many of the higher ed customers have mainframes from, when I was a child, and they still run mainframes. They still run a whole bunch of different technology, because once they invest in it, it's hard to let that go because budget is so hard to come by in education. And so very often, the environments that they're working in today, they started from bare concrete and built up their server rooms, or they built up data centers. And then as the industry sort of matured over time, different regulations came into play, and everyone's aware of personal identifiable information and sensitive information around teachers, parents, students, financial information. There's lots of information that's sensitive in higher ed, including intellectual property and research and all sorts of things. And so over time, regulation came about to try to protect that by instilling minimum requirements around data protection. And so suddenly the IT people had to also become sort of compliance people as well, and interpret these regulatory standards and industry standards and try to create their own internal security standards based on those. And so this can be very challenging, and everyone here knows that in education, it's hard to come by headcount that you would use to apply to IT versus other types of roles inside your organization. So part of what differentiates the cloud is you don't start from bare concrete. You don't start, you don't have to stand up your own IT systems, like, actually procure systems, right? Procure a server. Imagine if you had to procure computers, it could take 3 to 6 months for those computers to make it to the loading dock, get unloaded, roll them into a room, set them up, get the hardware set up. Sometimes you require power, sometimes electricity, heating, air conditioning, and so on. That can take a long time for some organizations to do. And then finally, you install an operating system, get to the point where you can run some applications and host them for your students or your teachers or faculty. And that can be like 6 months, a year, right? And so part of what AWS does is it allows you to shrink that time down and go from literally nothing to having that capability in like 60 seconds, right? Anyone with a credit card can open up an account in AWS. And the number of steps it takes to provision a server inside of AWS, you can provision one server, you could provision 1,000 servers or 1,000,000 servers. It's the same number of steps. You just increase the number that you want provisioned. So, and the beautiful thing about this is we take care of most of the compliance obligations that you have, right? At least for our portion of what we call the shared responsibility model. You're going to delegate a lot of stuff to us that you had to do on-prem before. And that is going to make your life easier because it reduces the burden on you. You can actually spend more time on other things maybe that you've never gotten to before. So all the what they call technical debt, we can really help with that because we give you a head start on a lot of the things you traditionally have to do yourself. So Bridget, if we go to the next slide, please. This is just a continuation on that theme. When it comes to security, everyone has seen lots of news cycles about ransomware and targeted attacks all over the place. Education, healthcare, nonprofit organizations, big government, municipalities. There's no vertical inside the public sector or commercial sector that's been spared. And so the reason why this is happening is partially because security is hard. And if you're doing it all by yourself, you've built up this infrastructure from the concrete floor, and you're managing all of that in addition to all of the security and trying to keep up to date with the security stuff and this compliance stuff. This can be challenging. This is a really hard job. And then depending on what type of education institution that you're managing, some of the students themselves love to tinker with technology and poke it, right? And so the very nature of academic institutions, people are curious, right? And so you've got more people that you have to deal with inside your perimeter as well as outside your perimeter. So they're very interesting environments, right? And so what we're trying to do again with AWS is make this easier, is to shrink down the amount of stuff that you have to manage yourself. And so we take away what we call the undifferentiated heavy lifting. All of this stuff that really, anyone could do if they had the time and the expertise. We just want to take that stuff away so that you can focus on what's important to your organization, the solutions that you want to offer to your, your faculties, the solutions you want to offer to parents and students, intellectual property research, whatever the case may be. Focus on that instead of all of this IT stuff. And so that's really what AWS is all about. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about the last two items on the right-hand side there, the central control plane. You'll hear me refer to this as an API, or an application program interface. And then everything is automated. These two things are really game changers for security and compliance professionals and can be very helpful in an educational context. And I'll kind of explain why. If we go to the next slide, please, Bridget. So the advantages of an application program interface. Today, in your on-prem IT environments, you typically have administrators logging into systems using usernames and passwords and then issuing commands. Okay. Now those commands can be anything. They can be legitimate commands, or people can make mistakes that lead to bad security outcomes. There's also computers talking to other computers and systems talking to other systems. And so all of this stuff needs to actually be authenticated and authorized. You don't want things happening that you don't know about, that you don't want to happen. And so this is where this concept of an application program interface comes into play. There's only 3 ways to interact with the cloud. One of them is through your browser. So you'd open up your browser, go to aws.amazon.com, log into AWS, into your AWS account, and now you can interact with over 240 different cloud services inside of our cloud. All of that goes through a set of APIs that allows you to issue commands to the cloud. Another way that you can interact with the cloud is through what's called a command line interface, or a CLI. The command line interface is for people that want to write manual commands from their keyboard or run scripts to automate things. Okay, the commands that come from the command line interface have the same API calls as going through a browser. So it's very, very similar. And then finally, if you write an application using a software development kit or a cloud development kit, that application, when it interacts with the cloud, is again using the same set of APIs as the command line and the console. So that means that all of the interaction between you and the cloud is happening through APIs. And so if we, as security professionals, if we can just look at those APIs and log them, and then inspect the logs for indicators of compromise or things that shouldn't be happening inside of our account, that gives us like tremendous visibility. And then we can automate a response to that. So that gives us tremendous automation capability so that we can do things faster than waiting for humans to notice and then take action. Now, this is a game changer versus on-prem, because in your on-premises IT environment, most things are manual. And, I worked at Microsoft for many years. I can tell you that inside of Windows, there's thousands and thousands of APIs. So if you start to multiply in your IT environment, let's say you've got tens of systems, hundreds of systems, thousands of systems, the number of APIs just proliferates. And there's no central API. Every system has their own APIs. There is no central API in your on-prem environment. So there's no central place that you can log these things and get insight into them. Anyone with a credit card in 60 seconds can have that capability inside of AWS. It's baked in by default and it's free. And so this is a game changer. The advantages of the API give you great visibility and great control, because you can automate everything using these APIs. So Bridget, excuse me, if we go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is sort of blurry, my apologies, but what I'm showing you here is, I mentioned earlier that we can give you a head start. Thank you for trying to make that a little bit clearer. So essentially what we're doing here is I'm just showing you that this is what we call our shared responsibility model. And I'm showing you that when you use AWS, you're essentially delegating the data centers. So you said, hey, AWS, I don't want to buy my own real estate for data centers. I don't want to lease a server room or a data center from somebody else. You go ahead and handle all the real estate. You do the guards, the gates, the lights, the doors, the locks. You do all that stuff. I want you to take care of that for me. And then the basic computers and storage and databases and networking, you manage all that stuff for me. And what I want to do is come in and actually just run applications on top of this foundation that we give to you. And so that's what AWS really is. And we own that entire piece of the shared responsibility model. And that way you don't have to worry about it. You've essentially delegated the security and compliance of all of this stuff to us. And then you can build on top of that. And you're responsible for the data you put into the cloud, your compliance obligations. So we might help you with a head start for your compliance obligations, and then you'll still own some of those, presumably, depending on the requirements. But now, because we're doing some of that for you, the total amount of compliance that you have to keep your eye on has shrunk, because we're doing some of that for you. You've delegated it to us. So that means that it should reduce the complexity. It should reduce some of the cost. And this is one of the big reasons why customers come to us, particularly in education and healthcare and other industries that don't have huge cash flows like you see over in the commercial sector, is because we're actually offsetting a lot of the cost and complexity here and reducing the amount of expertise you actually have to have inside of your IT departments and allowing them to focus on the applications, because the students and the faculty and the stakeholders in education better than we do. And so, allowing you to build for them on top of our platform is really what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. So Bridget, if we could go to the next slide, please. And so this isn't a scenario where we just take care of everything for you. This is not your typical outsourcing model. This is a self-service hyperscale cloud. So you can see, I'm showing you here that, you've delegated a whole bunch of stuff to us, the facilities, the physical security, compute, storage, networking, virtualization, all sorts of stuff. But we don't know what your requirements are for your different solutions that you're going to build for your customers and your students and so on. And so there's a bunch of configuration things here that you have total control over. So if you have a particular standard that you're trying to meet, you still have enough control to configure those requirements the way that you want to audit them when you need to, make changes when you need to. If you've got experience and deep expertise, let's say around Windows operating systems, you can run Windows. If it's Linux, you can run Linux. If it's Ubuntu, you can do that too. If it's all three, you can do that. You get to decide, a lot of these decisions and still have granular control over them. Now, the thing about AWS, as I mentioned, we have over 140 services. So some of those services are, infrastructure as a service. So that's where you're making the vast majority of decisions. How many servers do I want? How many operating systems? When do those operating systems get patched? What are the passwords? Who has access to them? Like all of that stuff is within your control. But then if you decide to use a more managed service, so let's say we have a storage service and you just want to put files into that storage service, we're managing all of the servers underneath there. We're abstracting all of the technical details so that all you have to do is decide, do I want to encrypt my data before I put it in the cloud or after I put it in my cloud? And that's it. We take care of all of the other technical details for you. So that's an example of a managed service. So across those 240 services, you've got the option to use them as Lego blocks, essentially. Say, maybe I want to use some of these infrastructure services that I have more control over and my IT staff really understand. And maybe there's undifferentiated heavy lifting that, just using software as a service is a better idea, and abstracting all those technical details away, that makes more sense to us. And you can mix and match these things as Lego blocks to build solutions. So that's really what we're trying to do here. So Bridget, if we go to the next slide, please. This again is all blurred. I'm sorry about that. Again, what I'm showing you here is just a list of different certifications and attestations. So if you have, most education institutions actually have some compliance obligations, depending on the country and the state or the province and so on. And so here I'm just showing you a subset of the different certifications, regulations, alignments, and frameworks that AWS helps its customers meet. And so, for instance, you can see, for instance, FERPA and PEPITA and SOC 2 on this list. These are certifications, attestations, and attestation artifacts that many education institutions need to have so they can show the regulators that they've been doing meeting the regulated standard or exceeding the regulated standard. So what we do is we try to make our infrastructure map to this stuff and make it easier for you to prove to your regulators or certification bodies, whatever it may be, that you are indeed meeting or exceeding the requirements around these things. So that tends to shrink the amount of work that you have to do and the cost associated with that. And so if we go to the next slide, please, this is showing you an example of where a partner, like for instance, like Scribble software comes into play. And so you might be thinking, well, it still sounds really complicated. Like, okay, great. So you're giving me this infrastructure. I've delegated the security responsibility and compliance responsibility of all that infrastructure to you. I'm building on top of that now. but I still own some of the responsibility around compliance and security. Maybe that's okay. Maybe you have IT staff that's, big enough and competent enough and so on. They're really good and they can take care of that for you. In some cases, maybe they can't. Maybe you're a small, school district or something, and you simply don't have a whole bunch of IT resources. What you can do is come to an organization like Scribbles that makes a application or a suite of applications on top of AWS. So that's what I'm showing you here is the vendor portion of this. And what they do is they will inherit the certifications, attestations, and so on that AWS provides for our infrastructure. They will build their application or solution set on top of that. They will own the certifications and attestations for that section of the shared responsibility model. And then if it's a platform, let's say that their customers build on top of, then their customers might still have a little bit of work left to do in terms of complying with regulation. If it's not a platform, if it's just customers come in and use the software, then the customers probably don't have any responsibility. It's all about the vendor and AWS to cover that entire thing for you. And so that makes it really, really powerful. And I know that Scribbles, again, has things like FERPA and SOC 2 listed as things they pay deep attention to, right? And given that they're catering to the education vertical, that's awesome. That's what you want as a vendor that understands how this works and is paying close attention to the details around that stuff. Because there's a lot of vendors out there that they don't understand how this model works, and they just assume that if they use AWS, well, then everything's going to be okay. But it's okay for the stuff that we provide, but there's still work to do on top of that, and that's where a vendor like Scribbles that really understands this stuff comes into play. So that's a very positive thing. So if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so I think that's where we're at, is gave you a quick rundown of sort of how security and compliance works in AWS and how the shared responsibility model works. And then finally, how the shared responsibility model works with a vendor like Scribbles in there that can, again, reduce the complexity and cost around compliance and regulated standards and industry standards for education organizations. All right, so do we have any time, Bridget? Do we want to do questions or anything?
Yeah, we definitely, if anybody has questions, or some questions may come in after Tim, and if that's okay, I will email those to you as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you so much, Tim. This was really valuable information, especially about the ease of use and the idea of supporting schools by managing the complexities of IT using AWS.